case any of you don't know me, well, up to now that's been your advantage. But my name is immense privilege to be invited over here and give a series of presentations. Locomotive construction, I think, is the topic that I'm starting off. One of the things I'll be demonstrating, for those who may not know of this type, it's a Thomson A22 Pacific. Now, I better come clean at a very, very early stage and say this is an absolutely fantastic kit. And anybody who contemplates building one, I just say, well done. Now I say I better come clean, because I built the prototype, I built the first 4 production kits, I did the research, I wrote the history, and I wrote the instructions. So it's going to be bloody good. First principles. There is absolutely no point in trying to build a locomotive without getting the frame. Battleship technology. It shows the mastery that Ian Rathbone can achieve. Ian's a friend of mine and the horse trade, but for him to paint this locomotive, this 4mm 00 gauge B12 in BR line black, would be £250. On commission for a customer, it would be in the region, with Ian's painting, of about £1,100, so $2,000. How do you say to anyone that this is worth doing when somebody goes along to Hatton's or what's your hobby shop, Woodpecker, and said for $250, $300? Doesn't make sense. The way I would qualify that is to say, I made that. I think DJH kits are excellent. Now I'm going to say that, aren't I? Because I work with them and I work for them. And the only way, and this is not negotiable, the only way to fix it together is to solder it together. Tack is an initial solder joint, and that's that. The mechanical necessity that's going to be, that this is going to have to be put through. It's not going to have that much. That's the basics of white metal soldering. That's the reason why I've concentrated more on white metal soldering. It's more difficult. But it's got to be clean, you need plenty of flux. My pickups are entirely unsophisticated. Only things I don't solder on are things like domes.
What I'm doing today is how to make the Picocode track more realistic. Picocode 100. It's affordable, it's reliable, and I didn't come up with this idea. It was Graham Nicholas. This is my layout. This is, I don't know how long ago. It doesn't look like that now. But all this work in here, that the ones that you see cut in here, that was done by Graham. I've done all of it in prototypical. A standard Picocode crossover track center to track center is 50mm. So that to that, like that, the track center between there and there, if you put it together like that, that's 50mm, and that's too wide for prototypical. It's 61mm for secondary line. So with a bit of cutting, shaving, squaring, and elbow grease, you can make your Picocode track look. You can see that you mark a line, and then you measure 45mm, and that's the other main running line. So when you get it and you put it down, this is one I've done already. When you put it down onto it, you can see, and you can, that line runs through the middle of that one, and that line runs through the middle there. And all I've done is nipped the end off it. And you work the sleepers out the way you want it. And like I said, it took me a couple of goes. Sleepers are all the way over, where these ones have been. All the sleepers well done. Match up.
Today, what I wanted to do was to hopefully try and finish in my allotted time an A6.5 turnout. I've done some pre-work because I can't build a turnout in 45. So I've used, to give you a bit of an idea, that is the throat of a station called Cheapside. The first thing I want to do is I've put in the straight rail of the main road. You see that here. I've also put in the curved, I forget the term, stock rails. I've got a combination of PCB strip and also timber sleepers. I do like to still solder up the actual V crossing unit. Next thing to do for this turnout is to put in the V crossing unit. So I've actually so Templot very kindly gives you the exact the so-called fine point of the V, but also gives you a blunt V position, which is where this is now. And we'll just use some track gauges. So I've got two types of track gauges. There's just a plain track gauge and there's a check gauge. Okay, where's the solder got to? Oh, there it is. The great beauty of using a large soldering iron is that as long as everything's fairly clean, you don't need to dwell on it for very long. And I was interested to listen to Tony. I've used this to solder white metal kits together, usually successfully, not always. Can be a problem if you dwell on it for too long. Let's put that down there. Okay, so I've soldered that in place. Now the other thing that we do, we've got chairs on the rest of the plain track. I actually just buy really cheap super glue because it's nice and runny, and you just sort of whack a bit on. So we've got that that's in place now. So next thing is we've got a couple of wing rails. The curved stock rail. Hack a couple of ends with the chairs. Because getting the curves right is always the hardest part, I find. Stock rails in place. That, in half an hour, is sort of the fundamental last task, which I always find really quite painful, is the actual switch blades. But with a switchblade, you might think, okay, well, you just file the back of it, and it's a bit of patience to do that. But what actually makes a far better job of it is that you actually file the inside top flange as well. The other nice thing that C&L do, actually they do lots of nice things, C&L actually. Okay, so they make up some nice, they're sort of functional fish plates, actually. I am much more of a fan of a fairly robust stretcher. What I now do is I just get a thin piece of PCB board. It's got a couple of holes drilled in, and these are actually track pins which are bent, pushed through, and they've got a bit of a joggle in them so that I can actually solder it up into the web of the rail. You can buy track gauges, so I've got about a dozen plain track gauges, which is very useful, so you can do pretty much a complete length of track in one go. For any of these things to work really well, you need to make sure that your wheel standards match your track standards. What we have got is the basic carcass of a turnout, so it would probably take another 20 minutes to finish off the rest of that, and then another half an hour to put cosmetic chairs and so on. That's it.
Or influential layouts. Now, that's entirely subjective, I admit. So the selection I've made is from my own photographic archive. This is Hitchin. It was built in the 60s and 70s and maybe into the 80s. Now, if I say this is the greatest model railway ever made, I'm not open to negotiation on that. That is a fact. This is Retford. Now, this is another one which appeals to me. It's Alloa, which was a junction serving the largest town in Clackmannanshire in Scotland. I didn't know that until I was told. I didn't even know there was a Clackmannanshire. Sounds Scottish, doesn't it? It equally sounds made up. This is built by a group from the northeast, the Middlesbrough Club. Engage this time. Eric Farrahar's depiction of the West Coast Main Line between Lancaster and Carnforth. I think that's extremely convincing. That's Engage. This is this. Clifton and Lowther. More Engage. This is John Burkett Smith. His work in Totnes. He has an artist's eye. Believe it or not, that back seam is no more than a foot away from the front of this locomotive. If you have enormous amounts of wealth and you can call on a very, very large team and your name is Pete Waterman, you can get it done. But even he doesn't put lamps on. Thank you, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll close there because
electronics to facilitate the operation of our railway. One of the fundamental things is that you make a choice, you make your decisions about how you want to build your railway at a particular point in time. But I knew nothing about electronics. Well, part of the solution for me was to build what I called the experiment of it, was very simply to expose, and me to learn whilst exposing it, various componentry that one could use for DCC. And basically, servos can be used to add motion in whatever you want to dream of. We can also see up here some examples of some different types of servos. That's the everyday servo, if I can call it that I've been using. The first ones that I bought. To its left, your left, is this grey looking one here. And this one is actually one of the waterproof units. So I've just labelled it 162, and there must be a number down here somewhere that I can read upside down. Okay. Now this one has been programmed via the Megapoints controller to give us signal bounce. And again, it's been programmed to give bounce. I'm a novice. I've only experimented with this stuff, trying to learn a bit as we go along. So that's my take on servos and electronics.
I'm going to talk about interlocking as applied to model railways, and especially my experience over the last 10 years or so. Basically, interlocking is an apparatus of some description that aims to prevent trains running into it. The sort of thing we are going to talk about is the steam age railway. So here's a couple of photos. You obviously recognise this as the inside of a signal box and some pictures of track. But specifically what I wanted to point out here was things called facing point locks. Okay, so on a model railway, why would you bother? If you have a collision when you've got an O-gauge train running 10 kilograms, running at 80 miles an hour, it makes quite a mess. Okay, so if you're going to go ahead and do this, there are a number of ways that you can do it, of course. Key point with Modratech, which is important. Okay, so I'm just going to run through very quickly a couple of examples of using SigScribe and how that works. So this is Ashworth that you've just seen a picture of. The picture was taken around here. It's a double track terminus. Sorry, what I'll just show you, if you've got hinges on there, if you open that up, you can see the locking. I did talk very briefly about electrical interlocking. Pull the switch and something may or may not happen. So you actually have to visually look to make sure it has happened. It's become a lot easier than it would have otherwise been. But there is a perfectly good product made by a BRMA member, and I would suggest that's a very good avenue to think about. It does provide a lot of protection on your layout, particularly if you have a large layout and run long trains, and if they're heavy trains, it's certainly very worthwhile. And I think most importantly, it adds to the fun of operating a model railway.
What is a timetable? Well, that's a good place to start. We're going to start with that. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about different types of timetables, both on the real thing and on the model. Why do I need a timetable? Guess what? First type is a public timetable. The other type of prototype timetable is the working timetable or the service timetable. It might include passenger trains or freight trains, or in many cases it will include both in the same set of tables. I'm going to mention today is a sequence. So the trains come and go in the same order that they would, but you don't refer to the clock at all. So how do I make one up? The starting point is usually what I call the control graph. It's a Kingsbridge branch in Devon, which is an ex-Great Western Railway branch. Now let's look at the service timetable. I haven't got too many. Okay, so here's a control graph for that service timetable that we just looked at. What you need to do is to convert it to a simplifier, and there are as many ways of doing this as there are people who operate model railways. Let me tell you that now. And that turns up to look like something like
Well, I don't know what drove you guys to build loco kits, but in my case, when I started in the early 70s, it was because of the poor quality and variety of the RTR offerings. And there wasn't really a hell of a lot around in the kit world either. And that's this little fella here. But they were pretty basic, the K's kits. This Newcast 264 Stanier tank loco. And by this time, I'd discovered people like Ultrascale and Comet frame kits, Comet valve gear etches, beautiful stuff. And I got all this stuff for building decent engines. It has a Comet valve gear etch. It was the first time I dabbled in things like sprung horn blocks. It's got Alan Gibson's sprung horn blocks in it. The Comet frames, valve gear etch. The Comet frames come with separate brake gear as well, so you get a really nice engine to finish it off. The Will's King, well, that quite a nice loco in the end. DJH came to the fore, and I think DJH, fair to say, sort of they made a quantum leap in the world of loco kits. On the one hand, they introduced the mix of white metal castings and etched brass, where the cab side sheets and the tender side sheets would be etched brass, and the rest of the loco would be the white metal castings. But the beauty was in the quality, the sheer quality of the castings. They're absolutely superb. This is the Britannia, which is, it's not a bad kit at all, the big Stanier stuff. And one of the glaring omissions in the world of loco kits and even decent RTR stuff at the time was Stanier's big. Brief word about the Princess. We're coming back to K's kits. K's sort of introduced a sort of new generation kit very late in the day. I think they retooled some of their LMS kit, but the body shell went together very, very nicely. And I did quite a lot of work on this one. It includes the inside cross. Then I got into 7mm. In the late 90s, I remember having a copy of Railway Modeller and thumbing through it, and I reached the news and reviews section in Railway Modeller. It was about 1996 or 7 or something, thereabouts. And there was a colour photo of this Martin Finney Duchess. I never forgot the Finney Duchess. So I got myself one. And what's more, I got a set of Alan Harris wheels to complement it. They cost more than the kit, believe it or not. That is just about the zenith of loco kits. You cannot imagine anything better. It is absolutely superb. It's a lovely kit to build, even though it takes a long time to put it all together.
Littleby. It's, for those who don't know, it's a relatively, or was a relatively modest station on the fastest main line in the whole of the UK. I have certain parameters which I follow and I will not move away from. That doesn't mean to say I can't appreciate other people's modelling, it's just that they're wrong. The first thing I will say, although this is my property, it is certainly not all my work. It's a team of about 8. That's what it was like in 2009. So our house is there, the goods shed, that's the remains of the goods shed. That's what it used to look like. That's looking south. Now, can we replicate it on Solomon? Made and laid the scenic side track. And I think, considering it's 00, it is absolutely exquisite. I use this picture for where you have to have tight curves. And once again, I'm saying my hypocrisy. I don't like tight curves on the scenic section. The dodge is to have the scenic get at the widest possible radius you can. And then when you go off sea, and there is the main sweep laid out. In 1938, along this track, a Yorkshireman drove an A4 over 2 miles. A signature building is the Willoughby Arms pub, and there it is in situ. And another thing that was very important about the building of Little Bynum is there's a lot of what you might call non-railway stuff. For the last 2 minutes, you can see that we're trying to get it. The Flying Scotsman represented. Prototype trains, 12 cars long. I've used the working timetable, I've used the passenger timetable, and we run a sequence. We've been able to at least show you a few things, maybe even entertain you. If I've upset you or offended you, good. I haven't lost my touch. But if you have any questions, well, we're out of time, so that's it.